Get rid of the 7 principles? I was alarmed when I first heard that they might be removed from Article 2 of the Unitarian Universalist Association Bylaws. I love the principles. Over the years that I've been a minister, I have often thought and preached about them. The principles seem like poetry to me in their diction, brevity, and their movement from the individual, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, to ever-expanding realities, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, acceptance of one another, and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, ending with the whole of reality, the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, and all pivoting on the middle and foundational principle of free and responsible search for truth and meaning. I've had my questions about the principles. For example, should they be in reverse order, stressing our interdependence rather than our individualism? Should the first principle be about every living being? Should there be an 8th principle about race relations? I expected revision, but not a proposal that at first glance seemed to throw the principles out and replace them with 7 values. I reacted with resistance. If you react similarly to this proposal, I urge you to pause, gather information, and reflect. I'm actually a bit chagrined to realize how attached I've become to the principles. I have invested so heavily in them that I found myself hanging on and resisting something different. As many of you know, such attachment, Buddhism teaches, is what causes us to suffer because it denies the impermanence and the need to adapt to changing times. The principles were never meant to be cast in stone like the 10 Commandments. As the many proposed amendments of the principles over the years reveal, they were always intended as a guide, open to change with growing understanding of who we are as UUs. The history of Article 2 reveals that this proposed revision would be its 3rd version. The first version was in 1961, and it reflects compromises that were made to achieve mergers of the 2 separate denominations, the Unitarians and the Universalists. Principle 2 then, for example, was to cherish and spread the universal truths taught by the great prophets and teachers of humanity in every age and tradition, immemorially summarized in the Judeo-Christian heritage as love to God and love to man. This was a principle necessary for those who were still largely Christian. The second version, the one that we know, was adopted in 1985. Women and feminism initiated this revision, rejecting the exclusively male language of the original version. For example, it was full of he, him, his, and man. They also identified us at that time as a living tradition, one open not only to the world religions, but also to change and new wisdom. Now in 2024, there's a 3rd proposed version, and many see in it, as I do, our current effort to widen our doors to all who share our values, but in particular to people of color. In recent years, UUs have begun to grapple with the ways in which we as a denomination reflect white privilege and white supremacy. and therefore are largely a white denomination. For example, whereas we have stressed the individual, people of color have found their support and meaning in community. Similarly, whereas many of us have rejected God, many people of color are theists. Some UUs are even challenging us to be open to people of different political persuasions. My point is that we have changed and are changing, and it is time that Article 2 reflects our new understanding of ourselves. Those of us who want to hang on to what we've got until we grow into the new Article 2 need not worry. The principles are everywhere. In fact, they're in the front of our gray hymnals, so they're not going to go away. What's more, in this proposed third version, 6 of the principles are included in the explanations of the 7 values. The only one that's left out, and I have no idea why this happened, is the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. When you look at the insert in your order of service, what's noticeable immediately is that this version is a lot longer. 7 principles are about this big, right? Including several sentences of explanation of each of the 7 values. Its essence, however, is simply 7 words identifying our values. Love is in the center, and it's surrounded by interdependence, equity, transformation, pluralism, generosity, and justice. These values form a rainbow graphic, which doesn't show on the insert, but all of these are different colors, with love as the flame of the chalice in the center and surrounded by each of the other values, forming a 6-petal flower. The shift from principles to values seems a huge change. I don't even think the board anticipated this kind of change when they made their charge. The current Article 2 Study Commission who wrote this proposed revision explained that since we're always talking about our shared UU values as what holds us together, it seems important to identify them, especially since they're not immediately obvious in the principles. What's more, there's no mention of love in the principles unless you count the reference to compassion in the second principle, justice, compassion, and equity in human relations. Even though our hymns and our readings and our sermons affirm love's significance and power in our faith tradition. I mean, this morning, love is the spirit of this church. Love will guide us. I like the shift from principles to values, finally, after some struggle, even though I found myself wanting to add others. For example, freedom or forgiveness or reason. On the other hand, I see why the Article 2 Study Commission chose only 7. I think they're thinking back of our principles, 7 values. I also see that the principles are often the source of the values that they've identified. For example, interdependence clearly comes from our 7th principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. And under pluralism, we find we covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning, giving our 4th principle a communal rather than an individualistic flavor. Justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, our 2nd principle separates into 3 values: justice, equity, and love. Transformation expands upon the 3rd principle, which is acceptance of one another and encouragement of spiritual growth in our congregations, calling us to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically, and to be open to change reminding us that we are a living tradition, not one stuck in the past. When I first read this proposed revision, I was startled to see love, transformation, and generosity included. Part of the problem is love is such a squishy word. I quickly understood that love is central, but not the emotional and sentimental love of romance, but rather the enduring, persevering love that frees all living beings from suffering. I have long believed that love is at the core of our theology and deserves to be explored repeatedly and deeply in terms of how we are to live and act. And I appreciate the complicated and rich relationships that are suggested between love and each of the other values and with each other. There's so much to be explored here. For example, recognizing our interdependence, we humbly acknowledge our place in it and covenant to protect Earth and all beings. In other words, recognition of our interdependence motivates love expressed in acts of caring for the Earth. Or as another example, our value of justice, arriving from our awareness of our interdependence and combined with love, leads us to work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive. While I also rather quickly understood that transformation has long been a value in our living tradition, generosity really seemed kind of brand new to me. I welcome it. I believe that loving, we always want to give. So I'm glad that the Article 2 Study Commission included it, but it's not in the principles and not as dominant as love in readings, hymns, and sermons, except perhaps in pledge sermons and in our abundant willingness to help others in need. It is a good addition, sure to provoke worthwhile exploration and action. And so we come to equity, whose presentation troubles me. I am, of course, in favor of equity, which calls for fairness and efforts to provide resources and opportunities so as to level the playing field. While acknowledging that we're not all equal, equity affirms that we should all have equal rights. So I accept the value. Here explained as we declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. We covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities. But I don't think that it says the same thing as the inherent worth and dignity of every person. I've always read the first principle as recognition that we as a denomination accept that each of us is inherently good, not born in sin. Also, I would revise this principle, changing every person to every living being. But my point here is that the proposed version obscures, if not denies, belief in our essential goodness. I don't really know why this happened, but I suspect that the change was not meant to leave out this idea. For one thing, part of the explanation of pluralism is we celebrate that we are sacred beings, which would seem to imply our inherent goodness. But the way the word inherent is used here seems incorrect to me. There's the English professor in me coming out. Inherent means intrinsic, innate, immanent, built-in, inborn, ingrained, deeply rooted, essential. I don't know what it means to have the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. We simply are inherently good. I just don't think the language works here, no matter what the intention was. I know that some of the Article 2 Study Commission struggled with incorporating the word worth. In one of their reports, they explain, why worthiness? We're dealing with a past in which monetary worth was assigned to human beings. Worthiness is more explicit that we are talking about the quality of being worthy. Definition, quality of being good enough. We are all good enough as we are. Worth can be monetized. People were and still are monetized. That definition of worth was not the original intention, but the word is painful for people who have a history of their people being monetized. Worthiness can never be monetized. We are all worthy of love, respect, dignity, kindness, compassion, and care. I think in their struggle, something got lost. As it stands, it's not clear that the explanation of equity conveys the belief that we are all good enough as we are. In addition to the word inherent as used here, the word worthiness just doesn't work for me. Perhaps it's because it's a word we don't use very often. So what would I suggest? Every living being is inherently good and worthy of love, respect, dignity, kindness, compassion, and care. Finally, I also understand that the resistance to changing person to living being. We have so much work to do toward building beloved communities of people that asking us to care about communities of plants and animals may seem too much. But if we don't care for our other neighbors on this planet, we ourselves may not survive. If we believe in interdependence, we must widen our focus to include all living beings because we live in mutual dependence. Most certainly, it is crucial that we learn to live with and value a diversity of people, but it is also crucial that we attend to the earth, especially during this time of radical climate change brought on by our actions. The discussion of interdependence covers this, but every other value focuses exclusively on humans, revealing, I think, an unconscious anthropocentric bias. Somehow we need to do better. One small step would be calling for equity for all of the earth. After all this, I have to say, I would vote for the adoption of the 2024 proposal, probably will, hoping for changes in the explanation of equity, but voting for in any case. I haven't discussed the whole thing. There are other parts which you might want to look at, and these can be found at uua.org if you look at final proposed revision of Article 2, uua.org. The delegates at the 2024 National General Assembly of our denomination in June will vote the proposal up or down, including any accepted amendments. There are only 4 proposed amendments, and 2 are editorial, so I'm not going to talk about them. Another proposes adding reason as a value with this explanation: we search for truth and meaning informed by reason, evidence, and the results of science, motivated by wonder, curiosity, and compassion. We covenant to listen to and respect the views of others and to remain open to new ideas. The last amendment, fortunately, is a revision of the language used for equity, that if not everything I would like, is a really great improvement. It reads, we declare that every person is inherently worthy and has the right to flourish with dignity, love, and compassion. After all the amendments are voted up or down, it will take a 2/3 vote of all the delegates at GA to pass the document. I hope it passes, even without my hope for change of person to living being, because it can always be amended in the future. We are not casting something in stone. And because I think this proposal is significant, interesting, and mostly well thought out, and will provide us guidance for growth. I especially applaud it for its focus on community rather than individualism. Over my 55 years as a Unitarian Universalist, I've seen us come to greater and greater appreciation of beloved community and of its role in nurturing people and the earth. The notion of the separate, solid, noble individual who does it all on his own is fading away with our increasing understanding of our interdependence. What's more, this shifting view of who we are has resulted in more emphasis on spirituality, which in the long run is all about connection and relationship and not about the solitary individual. This proposed Article 2 is not the be-all, end-all. Nothing ever will be. But it does recognize somewhat, at least, where we are and provide guidance for the future. You should let our delegates from this congregation to General Assembly know how you feel. Only they can vote for or against the proposal. May our faith tradition blossom and flourish under this new guidance. Let it be so.